All right. Hi, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about sketching reptiles based on some photos that I've taken in the Galapagos and some recent nature journaling and sketching of reptiles that I've done here in the Galapagos Islands. I'm super excited to be going live today with you. And for those of you that are watching this as a recorded version at home, welcome and get your sketching and nature journaling supplies ready because this is a participatory class. So I'm going to switch to my camera for my sketchbook here and get your sketching supplies ready because this is going to be super fun. And I did just have to move locations so that I could get better internet. And it turns out where I am now, one of the neighbors is doing some woodworking. So bear with me if the noise is distracting. Hopefully it won't be. Hopefully we'll still be able to get into a flow state, even though I don't have any chocolate right now either. And I'll be running these slides, but you'll also be able to see my sketches happening over here on the side. Here are some pages that I did recently with the terrestrial iguanas on Baltra Island. This was actually at a place where people live. There's like a marine base there, Ecuadorian Marines. And that's why this particular iguana is sitting on a tile floor. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start off with some quick sketches because being able to do these quick sketches and not worry about the details is going to be super important, especially if you're sketching reptiles or nature journaling reptiles in the wild where they're likely to be moving around quite quickly. So get your sketching tools out. I'm going to be using one of these brush pens that I love. Pencil would also be fine. I might use some watercolor and talk a little bit about that. So if you want to do color, get your colors ready. I've got a piece of cloth here to clean on, and let's jump right in. It looks like James is here, Cindy is here, and ready to start. Okay, so let's do this. What we're going to start off with is I'm going to go through some of these slides sort of quickly, and what we'll do is we'll just do quick sketches of the reptiles, and they're mostly going to be lizards here to begin with, and I think I have some Galapagos tortoises coming up later on, but let's start with this one right here, and it's in a slightly weird position, but let's just get warmed up here. And remember, keeping them small is also going to make it easier. Sometimes drawing animals that are far away is actually better than drawing animals that are close up, because far away animals, you can't see the details and it focuses you on the prioritizing the important parts. And so in my opinion, the important parts are the parts that stand out most. So even the difference between light and dark, for example, is something that you see from really far away. So even if all you do is get a little sketch like that in, that will be good. Let me make that a little bit bigger for a second. So if these are the kind of sketches we're talking about here, so let's do a couple more of those with this current position. If you want, you can make them sort of like blind contour or modified blind contour. And like, if you don't see the eyes or you don't see a foot, then you don't have to draw it. The idea is to draw what you see and practice getting these kind of sketches in for the field, because a lot of times even a slow moving, relatively slow moving, cold-blooded animal is not going to sit still for too long. That one, I worried about it too much. The position's a little bit weird, sometimes starting with the center line down like where the spine of the animal is, and then thinking about the head in perspective, because the head is like a wedge. It's like a cheese wedge, just slightly at an angle. So many reptiles are going to have that center line down the middle. Paying attention to that and knowing the importance of that can be really helpful. And I think that's fine for this first one. So let's go to the next one and just be ready to sketch fast, because I'm going to move through these quickly. So obviously here, you're not going to be able to get like scales. So try to just focus on the main shapes that you see. I'm doing almost like a blind contour here, trying to get these major shapes. It looks kind of weird, but if it's not looking right away, don't worry. The important thing is just to move your hand and look with your eye and keep going. The facial details are often very interesting, but can lead you astray quite easily. So be careful if you include them. Like there, I just sort of, in some ways, might have ruined my drawing by putting in the line of the mouth there. I also created this circle where that sort of bump on the head is. That's an interesting shape, and by creating the circle, it was sort of a line of an exploratory line trying to understand the shape of the animal. And sometimes those exploratory lines might not look great in your final drawing, or they might be distracting in some ways. The important thing here, though, with this kind of sketching is to learn and improve your understanding of the anatomy of the animal. And if you're working with pencil, those exploratory lines won't be a problem anyways, because you'll be able to erase them. So here it looks like it has this weird brain thing on it, but I'm trying not to let that slow me down too much. And I'm going to do a couple more in here. Because remember, one thing that is often forgotten these days is that drawing is a learning tool. It's not just about creating decorations. It's a way to learn about things. And paradoxically, if you focus on it as a learning tool, your decorative drawings will get better as well. And equally paradoxically, or the flip side of the coin, is that if you focus too much on the decoration side, your learning often suffers. So don't worry too much about the result and just keep moving, keep sketching, and we're going to move on to the next slide. So a slightly different position here. I froze this one. This is something you might not see or be able to freeze in nature because it happens so fast, but I was able to freeze the video. And this is the kind of thing that if I were nature journaling it, I would make it more of like a comic, because let me move my computer a little bit here, because showing it as a comic might be a good way to kind of just communicate that information in more of a symbolic way and tell this part of the story about how this iguana, this land iguana, was licking my foot. So I'm not worrying as much about the details here, but you also could be thinking about just sketching the proportions of the head, because the head is at a slightly different angle. So while I'm talking about proportions, I'm just going to zoom in on mine a little bit here for a second, so that you can see what I'm talking about. Right here, you can see this cheese head, and I think it's really important to practice thinking about animal heads, whether they're reptiles, birds, or mammals, as these sort of simplified shapes. And if you can draw these simplified shapes or discover where they are in the animal that you're drawing, it's going to facilitate your drawing quite a bit, and it's going to help you sketch more quickly and more accurately. So I'm seeing this sort of shape. It also goes up from here. That's sort of that first bump. And then there's another bump again with a sort of ridge. So if you think about shapes like this, if you can draw basic shapes like this in perspective, it's like a cube with a curved top. And then you can practice rotating those around. If you can do that, you can draw almost anything. So let's see if we can see this one from the other side. Would be like that. So that's what I mean by basic shapes, and sometimes just practicing sketching those, or trying to see where those are in a reptile that you're trying to draw, can be super helpful. Kind of looks like a loaf of bread. Okay, so next one. All right, just a slightly different position. So it's a great time to practice capturing that perspective accurately. Don't worry too much about the mouth. It looks like this part of the sort of jowls goes beyond that first initial shape that we created. And then there's a center line coming through here with the spines. So that's basically all. Let's sort of, if you can capture this shape, that's the most important part. So I'm going to flip over so I don't cramp myself, especially when doing warm-up sketches, it's good not to stay on one page too long if it starts filling up and it seems like it could be slowing you down and making you a little bit too cautious in your drawings. This type of exploratory sketching is where the real learning and the real improvement happens. And I think sometimes if we're too worried about the outcome, the results of our drawing, we don't do enough of this type of sketching, and we never really get that good at drawing. And whether it's just putting in a ton of hours before a certain age, before you're worried about those things, or whether it's just diligently and through self-awareness, practicing this more sort of carefree type of exploratory sketching, however you achieve it, getting in a certain amount of this type of exploratory sketching is the main way to really improve your drawing. So you can see there, let me make that bigger. You can see there on this one, I think I did a little bit better job of getting the three-dimensionality of it. So that's what we're shooting for. And I'm going to keep moving on to the next one because we're trying to do some quick sketches as a warm-up here. Here's one moving. Here's a fun pose. So try keeping it really simple, keeping it small, and maybe doing multiple versions of it. What are the priorities here? What can you actually see? What can't you see? Where does that center line go? Don't draw a leg if you can't see it. It's not necessary to add that dark in, but it just sort of felt like it there. I'm going to do another one. Oops, didn't really give very much space there. Try to be objective when you look at your own drawings and notice like if there's a pattern, like do you on these sort of foreshortened, because this is foreshortened, it's coming towards us in a way that hides how long it is. And if you notice that whenever you have a foreshortened subject like this, maybe you tend to extend it out behind itself in a way that it actually isn't in real life or in the photo, and try to notice that and do something about it. Sometimes we don't actually notice our own errors. It's really common. It's been happening since biblical times. And I think there's a quote from the Bible about how it's easier to notice the tiny speck of dust in someone else's eye than to notice the huge log or something in your own eye. That's not an exact quote from the Bible, but so on this one, I really messed up the foreshortening, but I'm going to try to just be non-judgmental and objective. So instead of pretending like you're not making mistakes, we don't want to pretend like we're not making mistakes. We don't want to pretend like we don't need to improve and don't want to improve. But we also don't want to like judge ourselves so harshly that we end up giving up. So I'm going to zoom in on mine and give a little bit more detailed idea of what I'm talking about here with the foreshortening. So if we're just talking about a cylinder, for example, here's the cylinder almost totally on its side. And that's how long it is. Now, if the cylinder was pointing straight towards us, all you would see is this. That is foreshortened. So this is the same cylinder. Here, it's not that it's shorter. It's just pointing at us in a way that we can't see how long it is. It's the same with this reptile is coming towards us. And one thing that sometimes people do is instead of showing it flattened, like that it's only this, like we only see it that long, people will extend it out this way and end up drawing the back going out way further that way and the tail going out way further that way, because their brain is sort of doesn't want to deal with the foreshortening. So if you notice that your foreshortened lizard, or this would be even worse with a snake, if you notice that you're doing this and extending it out, just try to be aware of that and go back to what you actually see. So right now I'm going to go back to the lizard that I actually see, and I'm really going to focus hard on trying to capture that foreshortening and draw like what I see. That's probably not right either, the way that leg comes. I think one thing, if you can train yourself to have this sort of hyena mentality, is when you notice that something is hard for you to draw, instead of giving up and saying that you don't like drawing moving animals, or you don't like drawing things in foreshortened things, instead of that, take the hyena mentality and say you're just going to chew on it and just keep chewing on it and try to do like 10 drawings of that thing that was really hard for you to do. Cindy has a really great recommendation here as well, which is to look at negative space. If you look at the negative space around and under the arms, it would be really fun and really helpful, especially if you're working with a drawing tool that allows you to kind of add negatively or subtract, I should say. That would be really, really fun and really helpful for getting these shapes accurately. So like if you look underneath the chest of this land iguana, at how the legs connect, you can see this shape here, which is the negative shape or the negative space between it's basically the air underneath the torso and between the arms. Great idea, Cindy. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Here's just a slightly different position. So good practice sometimes to draw something. If you take a video of like a hummingbird, I think we did this with a hummingbird slow-mo video. Take a video of a hummingbird and then try pausing it in a bunch of different places and drawing it at slightly different places. Or animals walking. It's a great idea. So I noticed the foot on the outside is, the front foot on the outside is now, this might be going backwards. I think this is the previous frame. The head is also at a different angle. So I'm going to just do a sketch of that head angle here. It kind of looks like this to me. One thing, if you notice yourself really freezing up and having a lot of like judgment about the way your drawings are looking, is to just focus on one part at a time, like just 1 foot even. Right now, I'll just look at that back leg for a second. Turning things into a diagram is another way to get away from that judgmental part of yourself. So we got a few sketches on that, and almost time to move to the next one just to keep the speed up. Slightly different pose. Just do this one really quickly if you can. I notice the curve that goes from the back to the tail is changing. It seems like its overall angle to us seems to be changing. And remember, if you can get that sort of center line in first and some of the major movement, you can capture the kind of overall feeling of the animal is more important than like, trying to get the toes right or the scales on the face. So trying to get that main curve that goes from the head. I tried it on that and then I messed it up. Feel free to do that a couple of times and try to get that. Sometimes that main curve requires a certain amount of looseness with your hand and practice. How Okay, let's go on to the next one. One more. Let's do just one more of this land iguana pose. Looks like it's stopped a little bit more here. It's less foreshortened now, that's for sure. I'm going to show you a quick trick for showing the legs that are in the back. One thing that you can do to help indicate the legs that are in the back is to just make them completely dark like that. That can be a really helpful way. Like, so even though I don't see the ones on here right now, I'll just pretend, and I can make this one black as well. A lot of times those legs that are in the back are shaded. They're in shadow. So I think people's brains sort of automatically recognize that. Does that make sense? Okay, next. We got some Galapagos tortoises coming up. I think we had almost this exact same perspective before, but I'll just mention again, scales are really tricky. I would say avoid them until the last minute. If you're nature journaling or sketching in the field, avoid the scales to the last minute. Or one thing you can do is you can make like a separate drawing, like a diagram type thing where you zoom in on the scales, because as soon as you start drawing the scales over the form of the animal, you're going to lose a lot of the depth and three-dimensionality and realism that you created in your sketch of the animal. So one thing you can do here is create this sort of a diagram where you, instead of drawing the scales on top of this three-dimensional animal that at least has some semblance of three-dimensionality to it, instead of drawing the scales on the head there, you could do this sort of diagram tool and show the scales over here. Okay, here's another tricky perspective on this one. It's sort of dog-like. If you're having trouble with these, try drawing them really small and not giving yourself very much time on each one. This one is also foreshortened in a slightly weird way. This would actually be something that if you have a dog at home, I know it's not a reptile, but you could practice this type of position when they're really hungry and begging for food or attention. And this perspective is actually really cool and also challenging. I think I got lucky by doing it really small. Sometimes a really small drawing can come out better than a bigger drawing. Okay, we've got another type of lizard, actually two types of lizards, two geckos here, and they're both invasive species in Galapagos. One, the mainland, Ecuador and Peru and other parts of South America, that's the bigger one. It's a leaf-toed gecko. And then the smaller one is the all-female species of gecko, Leptodactylus lugubris. And I know I've talked about the all-female geckos on my Instagram before. If you haven't followed me there, just search for Marley Pfeiffer, and you should be able to find me. I don't know if I've talked about it. I've probably talked about it on my YouTube channel, but that is an all female species of gecko. So here we also, the interesting thing is if you're nature journaling reptiles, it's good to nature journal them in relationship with the other species that they relate to. So no animal, no organism that we're going to sketch or nature journal is an island. Nothing is separate from everything else in nature. And we have this tendency to draw them just floating in space. So like, as you can see, we did with all these iguanas, they're just floating in space by themselves. But in the real world, they're in relationship with their environment and other things. So here is an example that is not easy to draw and might not be what you would choose to show this species. But there is a connection going here. There's an interaction between two organisms, two species, and I think trying to at least practice sketching that is really useful. And certain animals are often in herds. They will often be in these shapes that overlap, and the overlapping animal shapes can be really challenging if you don't practice it. So now is a good time to practice it in a judgment-free environment. So see if you can just kind of do a quick sketch of what's going on here. If I were nature journaling, I would definitely be using writing a lot here, writing questions, writing observations, things that I notice. I noticed this mosquito is coming to bite me. one of the main things I notice is the differences between the toes. So I'll just create a quick diagram here. I'll show you how I would sort of nature journal this a little bit. This one has toes. This one's called a leaf-toed gecko for a reason, the whole genus. That's how I would turn something like this into a diagram. And sometimes doing things like this, like if you didn't like the way this drawing up here looked, doing it in this way is going to take some pressure off of that, um, off of that drawing. And that's like one of the main things I use to try to make my pages look better. One of the main things I do to try to make my pages look better is I don't put a bunch of pressure on a single drawing. I try to make the overall page have have a lot going on, and there's like a cumulative aesthetic effect. So here you can see on this page, I'm not dependent on this one drawing being really good. I have a cumulative effect because there's a lot of different things going on, and some of them are just diagrams. And I find that that is really helpful, and it takes a lot of pressure off of things. Okay, let's see. Let's go to the next one. All right, I'll make that bigger. Here is cool because this is sort of like a silhouette. This would also be a good place to focus in on the feet. So the pop quiz is which of these toes or these toes that you're looking at right now are similar to which of the two types of toes that we were just looking at. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think lizards almost all 5 toes. So I focused so much on the foot here that I kind of messed up the overall shape. So I'm going to go back to the overall shape. And for the overall shape, the actual toes are not really a priority. Remember, there's certain parts of the whole, or the whole itself is probably like more important than any of the parts. And so there I just messed up the angle. The angle is important as well for the overall just feeling of it. I might try that again because it still didn't do a great job. One way you could do this is sort of to start with like gray or pencil. Like if I were drawing this with pencil, this is how I would do it if I were drawing it with pencil. I would probably start with this line down the middle, just getting the kind of through line. Then I would kind of try to get basic shapes or sizes of how much space these different things, such as the feet, like the feet are basically round if you include all the toes as one thing. The stomach has a special curve to it that I messed up on my other one. And then there's an angle here too, so don't mess up that angle. I messed it up. On the first one, it's totally the opposite. And then the circle for the foot is basically there. This one goes back this way. And the circle for the foot is like that. And then the tail actually goes more this way. So if you start with a little bit of that, a little bit pre-planning like that, then when you come back, you can get this stuff more close to being right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Back. Really short arms. Easy to mess that part up. This leg comes out at quite an angle. Pretty pointy knee. Overlap here. 2, 3, 4, 5. Somehow comes back like that. This tail was a little bit closer to that toe. Stomach line around. Oops, elbow should have come out there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Obviously, this isn't a science illustration. I'm trying to sketch this reptile, and this is just one level up from the way that I was doing it here, where there's just a little bit more pre-planning and not going straight to ink. I like ink for sketching in the field. I used to always nature journal and sketch with pencil exclusively. 1, 2, 3. But when you're in the field and you have reptiles that are moving, I think going straight to ink is a lot better. For example, like this, obviously there's things about this that are not perfectly accurate, but if I had been working with pencil, I never would have been able to finish this drawing, and I wouldn't even be able to show it to you right now because it would be super pale. Because I went straight to ink and I took risks, I was able to actually capture something in the field. All right, we're going to go back one briefly and add some color and talk a little bit about color. I think this is a good place to use color because we have two that are really close together. Actually, let me make this a little bit bigger. We have two that are really close together, and one of the main differences between them that is easy to show is the difference in color. So I'm going to get my water brush, water flowing and ready to go. And I'm going to start with the Leptodactylus lugubrious, which is the morning gecko, the all-female species. And I'm going to mix a little bit of quinacridone gold with some buff titanium here. And I'm using my water brush that flows more slowly. Hopefully you saw my video about how to use a water brush. And I talked about several techniques, and one of them was using multiple water brushes, having one with a slower flow, which is usually the older one, or always the older one. All right, so that color is almost like right on, so I'm just going to leave that like that. And change color to sort of like a maybe buff titanium mixed with bloodstone genuine would work for the other one, which is Phylodactylus. I think it's raci or racii, the leaf-toed gecko. Yeah, that's a good color. I think its toes seem like they were sort of paler. Obviously, always starting with our palest color first with watercolor, unless you have an opaque white or some other opaque tool. It's probably like 80% humidity out, so my watercolor is not going to dry super fast. For fun, while I'm waiting for that, I'm going to paint negative space around this gecko silhouette. That's what it kind of looked like in real life. Well, maybe I'll erase this pencil first. Pro tip, don't blow your eraser shavings when you have wet watercolor somewhere on the page. If you have wet watercolor somewhere on the page, the airborne eraser shavings will fall and stick to the wet watercolor wash and often affect the way the wash comes out and leaves like a weird texture. And it's really, if you have some amount of OCD like I do, it'll drive you crazy. So don't blow. Ideally, you should do all of your erasing at a completely different stage than when you're doing watercolor. So I'm going to get a dark wash here. Maybe I'll add some blue to this, actually. That would be fun. I'm going to get some ultramarine blue. A nice granulating color will make it more fun. The gray I'm using is shadow violet, which is also pretty granulating. So what I'm going to do, ideally, I would have a box here. So maybe I'll just quickly paint a box. This kind of thing looks better if you have a bounded area. And just to make it quick, I should be actually using my other brush that has a quicker flow. Looks like I already got an eraser shaving in the mix. I'm going to hit the big areas first and squeeze my brush a little bit to put out water, not that much water. And hit these big areas first, and hopefully I can get into these small areas before the staining elements. Ultramarine has staining pigments in it, and I don't want that to leave these obvious brush stroke lines. This kind of stuff with watercolor, it just takes practice. You have to be able to do certain things fast, and you have to sort of be able to come up with a plan and know, like, okay, I have this much time before this line starts to set in permanently, and I have to fill in this whole area and try not to leave brush strokes before this dries. And then also knowing, for example, that like it will pool up in certain places and that will leave another kind of mark. This is why I think it's funny that some people think watercolor is like this super relaxing thing. I think there's a lot of these aspects of it that are actually tend to be kind of stressful. So as you can see, it's not as dark as I would like, and it's too blue, but there actually is like some of those lines that I was trying to avoid. Like right there is probably the worst one, and a couple other places. But anyways, it's a fun thing. That's something, it's a little bit more advanced than what I would do in the field. You could do it. Especially like for something like this where you're showing the feet. So it's good to know how to do something like that. It could be an interesting technique. Oh, and now that this is dry, we can put in some of the little marks that we see there. So I've noticed that the Leptodactylus lugubrious has these sort of parallel spots, usually like right along where the backbone is. That often looks sort of like this. And the backbone is way over here because it's in this weird twisted position. It's biting the bigger one. Like I couldn't figure out what was going on here. Obviously, my first interpretation is, oh, the big one's trying to eat the little one, but it was only biting the little one on the tail. And these geckos can lose their tail basically at will. So it could have run away, but instead it was biting the bigger one on the neck. And even at one point I saw the big one let it go for a second, and instead of running away, it continued to bite back the bigger one. So I don't understand what was going on here. And if I were nature journaling, I would definitely write a lot of questions, starting with something like, what is happening here? Or even just like a big question mark. You could write a big question mark, and then you could write eating, fighting. Another question that we often don't ask is very self-reflective, is what am I not thinking of, or something like that. If you can learn how to ask that question, it can increase your awareness and wisdom a lot. What am I not thinking of right now? Or what perspective am I not looking at this from right now? Okay, now I'm going to add some dark spots on the Phylodactylus. And it has like a totally different pattern. It seems like it has a little bit of a line going down the middle of the tail. And then it has like this sort of weird asymmetrical, like random pixelated pattern. It definitely looks more cryptic overall. Sort of banding like this. And this kind of watercolor you can totally do while sketching or nature journaling reptiles in the field. I do this all the time, and it's really important to be able to do this because with your watercolors, you can quickly get stuff about these reptiles that really helps make them recognizable to species or to genus or something. And a lot of times these are the types of things, like if you're using colored pencils, it would take you forever to try to get these patterns, but you'll see that pretty quickly I can capture a lot of the essence of this gecko's overall pattern. And it looks like it's got some dark spots there. I'm going to zoom it back in again to help me out seeing it. Its toes seem like they get darker. Darker legs with light spots. And some random dark spots on the head. So you'll notice there's like this paler thing going down the midline of that gecko. So I think that patterning is pretty good for, basically 3 minutes of doing watercolor. All right, let's see what we got next on these slides. I think we've got some tortoises coming up here pretty soon. Oh yeah, so one thing that happens in nature is you don't always get the best perspective. This is one of the few wild Galapagos tortoises that I've seen in the Galapagos. This was on Isabella Island. I was finding their poop, and then I got really excited. I'm finding their poop. They must be somewhere nearby. Obviously, I don't want to bother them, so I didn't try to go around the side to get a better perspective. But this is basically the perspective that I got on this Galapagos tortoise. And so what would you do if you had to sketch this? Let's go ahead and create some sketches. How would you sketch this tortoise? Maybe this is the only time you're going to see it. This is an endangered species. It could go extinct during your lifetime. If you just take a photo or you just, don't sketch it because it's in a weird position, that's going to be really unfortunate. And if you do take a photo, it's going to be, 10 years in the future, you might not even be able to find that photo. Let's be realistic about digital photography, because people take photos all the time, and sometimes they just can't figure out where they are, can't figure out where to store them. They get lost later. They're kind of a pain in the butt. So if you saw something like this, I think sketching it is going to be probably the most valuable thing you can try to do. So it seems like, and where I'm kind of by default going is starting to draw these, I think there might be called scoots, the different little scale-like shapes. And this is hard. Like, I've already messed up the geometry, I can see. This is the type of thing where, similar to the gecko shape, you might want to start with like a plan so you can get this geometry correct. One of the things with these, with tortoises, that's going to be a real pain in the butt is that if you don't get this right, and this pattern is called a tessellating pattern. Tessellation is when things fit together like tiles. I think Greek for tiles is like tessella or tess or something like that. So tessellation is always hard to draw quickly. You can draw it if you're drawing it slowly and sort of mapping it out. So maybe you don't want to try to get those right away. Maybe a better approach would have been for me to try to get these other aspects of the body first, such as the foot coming out. Regardless, you might end up with a drawing that's not like super recognizable as a tortoise, but I think practicing sketching things like this is going to make you better. And if you have to deal with something like this in the field, you will know some tactics and you'll have some experience. So let me just show you mine so you feel better about here you can see what mine looks like. And remember, one of the things you can do in this kind of situation is turn it into a diagram. So if I were sketching this in the wild, I would have arrows pointing to it. I might put I might do a little venting here with a sad face and say hard to draw. That is a perfectly legit strategy. You can also create like a separate thing over here. Remember, using drawing as a learning tool, and try to understand the pattern. So like, for example, I'll switch to gray really quickly, and I will draw something where I try to just understand this pattern. And I'm going to have to make it bigger so I can see it too. So I see this shape here, and it comes up like this. Okay, I see that. Now I see these going out this way. Maybe I'll make these a little bit lighter. These go out this way, and then they have to connect to another one that is it a square? I think they're all like more like pentagons. It Kind of looks like a square, but I think it's more like a pentagon. If you're using graphite or almost any other drawing tool besides ink, it's going to be a lot easier for this kind of thing. This goes up almost straight. And then I think there's just another big pentagon type shape up here that has to complete these ones. And then these, not only are they tessellating, but they're also in perspective and like foreshortened. So that is not an easy subject to draw. So it's important to understand that when you're sketching reptiles, scales, these kind of scoots, like on a tortoise or a turtleback, those are objectively hard to draw things. So if it's not going well, it's not just because of you, it's an objectively hard to draw shape. Venting a little bit on paper is a good strategy. Creating a diagram is also a good strategy. All right, let's see what other ones we've got. Okay, here's a perspective that I think is going to be more rewarding, just in that it's objectively more tortoise-like, and we can focus, for example, on on even just the head shape. So remember how we did with the iguana? That is one strategy. You could just draw a couple cheese wheels, modified cheese wheels for this tortoise head connected to a modified cylinder for the neck, and that might just in and of itself be a good way to get started and to get warmed up looking at this cool reptile. This one is actually at the San Diego Zoo, as evidenced by the jacaranda flowers on the ground, which aren't native to San Diego but really common. San Diego Zoo might be one of the best places in the world to see Galapagos tortoises, actually, outside of Galapagos, or maybe even including Galapagos. I can't remember which species these ones are. You could draw a little bit of the shell too, and maybe a little bit of darkness here. So I got a few of the head. Now I'm going to try to do a really small one where I get everything that I can see here. And you might be thinking, oh, it's annoying that it's cropped off in the photo. Well, in nature, that's going to happen. They're likely to be partway in bushes. Partway obscured animals is sort of the normal in nature. A lot of animals, you'll never see their feet because the feet are always in the grass. Like when I went nature journaling on 2 safaris in the Serengeti with John Muir Laws and a bunch of other people, a lot of the animals, most of the animals we saw, we would never see their feet. So I've been practicing drawing all these different African mammal feet, and then I got there and I never saw the feet. Similar with birds. So you have to be prepared for that. See, what is the smallest drawing of this turtle you can do? It's a giant tortoise, but see how small you can make it. Practicing drawing things small is going to force you to learn a lot, prioritize a lot, and sometimes it works in reverse. So like going back to the Serengeti, drawing animals that are far away, practicing drawing small wildebeest, for example, was a really, really good strategy. Okay, so I got 2 small ones. I've got the head. Let's go on to the next thing we got here. Maybe you could zoom in on the feet. Here's a slightly different position. Mine is in a weird covered up way. If you feel up for a challenge, you could drawing the shell again with the all of the plates. I think they're called scoots. When I'm feeling overwhelmed on an animal like this, I just draw a cheese wheel of the head. My light just went away. Toes are also fun. All right, let's go on to the next one. And one more perspective on this, you can see the shell in a different way here. And the head is also facing the other way, so a great chance to get the head pointing another way. I made the neck way too short. I'm going to draw this dark back there, and I'm going to do another one, but make it really small. I'm going to do a video soon where I go nature journal some Galapagos tortoises in the wild on Santa Cruz, one of the species on Santa Cruz Island. And I'm a little bit behind on editing videos for the Nature Journal show because I have been doing lots of lives, and I've been creating this new Skillshare class about landscape painting, watercolor landscape painting. I've been working on it for like 4 months or more. So I'm really excited about that. Some of you know I already have a Skillshare class out. This is the address, the link for it if you want to check it out. Let's see if I can put that into the chat as well, because then it will actually show up as a link. And it's about nature journaling in the desert. It's basically a virtual adventure. It feels like you're in the desert with me in the desert in Borrego Springs, nature journaling landscapes and desert plants. So it's a super fun Skillshare class. And if you use that link, you can check it out, but you can also get a month off of a year-long subscription to Skillshare by following that link. And I think there's a way to, I think there's like, you might be able to do just like a monthly trial of it. If you do a monthly trial of it and decide you don't want Skillshare, that's totally fine and legit. I think if you do it that way, I don't get like a commission or anything from you following the link, but that's fine. I'm trying to do a couple of different things such as Skillshare, YouTube, Patreon to support myself financially because teaching nature journaling, it's been a little bit hard to make a living. So right now I'm making like less than $1,000 this month altogether, even though I basically work every day of the week all day long. So check out that Skillshare video if you haven't done Skillshare yet. I did a couple of videos where I break down the economics of it, and if you take enough classes, it's definitely worth it. If you don't take very many classes, it's not going to be worth it. But if you take like 10 classes, it starts to work out. All right, so I got a bunch of sketches in of this Galapagos turtle. Oh, it's Suzanne. Hi, Suzanne. And let's talk a little bit about other aspects of reptiles that you might find in Nature Journal. So this is going to be harder, for sure, harder to draw, but this is a land iguana. And I did do a sketch. Let me show you the sketch I did of it, actually. I think it's really easy when you're nature journaling or sketching in the field not to draw something like this. I knew it would be a hard subject to draw, but I think it was also important. So here you can see I did this sort of very loose sketch of it. I also showed what the teeth looked like. So I created it made it into sort of a diagram. I was with some kids, so I was sort of facilitating, and I noticed, I wonder, it reminds me of session with this dead iguana. But it's important when you're nature journaling or sketching reptiles to be prepared that there might be things that aren't the living animal itself that you still want to capture. So like if you find a tortoise shell or a turtle shell or something, or a snake skin, nature journaling those is really useful. And the strategy I recommend is just keeping it really loose, small if you can. And if it's like a snake skin, it might just be like this really loose general shape and maybe some handwritten notes. Sorry about the dogs barking in the background. There's lots of sort of semi-wild dogs here in the Galapagos. It's kind of a problem. They actually, with iguanas like this, on some islands they've extirpated the the land iguanas and even the marine iguanas, the wild dogs, eat them, and they kill lots of other things. And then there's just a lot of dangerous dogs here as well. Unfortunately, my friend got attacked a couple weeks ago, and that's something that I talked about on my Patreon, where I do these like mini podcasts talking about things that are happening here in the Galapagos. And obviously, if you're a Patreon member, you can go check those out on my Patreon. And in addition, even if you're not a Patreon member, you can listen to like the first minute of each podcast for free if you go to my Patreon, which is really easy to find. It's just patreon.com/MarleyKifer. It's the main way that I support the show and support myself at this time. And people who are members get access to special stuff such as those podcasts, and they also get to support the show for donation. Most people who support me on there are donating $5 a month. I support a couple people on there too. I think I'm a member on like 4 or 5 different Patreons, including some other nature journalers such as Beth Ann Burton, who has the Nature Journaling podcast. I think I'm also a Patreon member with Melinda Nakagawa. So here you can see what I ended up with. Nothing fancy, but I just want to show you that even if you find something like this, trying to sketch it is a good practice. So even if you know the subject is going to be hard, try doing it. You're going to learn, you're going to improve, and if you just get in the habit, you're gonna get better. And if you're a nature journaler, you need to record stuff like this. If you're a nature journaler and you just bias towards stuff that in your journal that you know is going to look prettier, you're going to end up with like an inaccurate representation of the world. And most nature journalers will explicitly tell you they're nature journaling to learn, to connect with nature, to observe, to record. But if you're just not recording certain things because they're hard to draw, then you're not capturing reality. And I think a lot of us aren't totally honest with ourselves about that. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Okay, so here's another example of things that reptiles might leave behind that you might not want to sketch. I'm just going to do it really quickly. This one I captured it in my first session of sketching this, but this is the land iguana poop, which is kind of interesting. I think I posted on iNaturalist as well. It's quite large, but even just getting a quick sketch of that next to the animal is just capturing more information. It's important. Reptile poop usually has like a white bit added to it, but the tortoises here and the land iguanas, I haven't really noticed that white uric acid piece. It's also important to capture the animals in their native habitat. So ironically enough, this land iguana was resting underneath this abandoned kids' play structure. This is actually a marine base where there's tons of these land iguanas. They really like it there. A lot of the islands are uninhabited and don't have human structures, but this is Baltra Island. It's one of the most impacted islands. The U.S. Army or U.S. Navy might have been took over parts of the Galapagos during World War II and built bases to help the Panama Canal, supposedly. And Ecuador got the land back, and the U.S. bombed the infrastructure that they had created there. And then the Ecuadorian government built some stuff that's not really in that great a condition, and there's like rubble all over the island. But these iguanas love it. So anyways, the important thing is showing the animals in their context. So I'm actually going to do a really quick sketch here, almost cartoon-like, of this play structure. This is another bias that nature journalers have, is we often don't show the human-made structures. A lot of people wouldn't even photograph this iguana in this location. They'd be like, ew, it's I'm going to try to get a photo where it just shows it and it looks like it's in wild nature. And then all my friends and everybody who sees the photo will be like, oh, look, it's in the wild. And that is exactly the reason why most people don't realize that people live in the Galapagos, is because photographers, tourists, and David Attenborough, they talk more about just the wildlife and they don't show the actual context. So let me just show you how quickly I created something here. I'm just going to write swing set and then point at the iguana and put an exclamation mark. If you include the actual environment and tell the real story, eventually we'll get to a place where like we don't live in this weird virtual reality where we think like the Galapagos is a certain way based on these like biases that photographers and everybody has. So let's try to, at least as nature journalers, we can at least be self-aware of that part. And then last but not least, this is Lonesome George. Let's do a quick sketch of Lonesome George. This is an extinct species, a completely extinct species. The species went extinct in our lifetimes, unless you're like 10 years old, I think, maybe a little bit older than 10, unless you're 10 years, oops, I don't have enough space for his neck. Unless you're younger than like 10 years old, this species right here went extinct during your lifetime. And what does that mean? Well, extinction is something that's been happening for millions of years. But for reptiles, for example, the extinction rate was like one reptile species would go extinct. The background extinction rate, as it's called, is like one reptile species every 1,000 years. And now what's happening is it's very likely that during our lifetime, Lonesome George is not going to be the last Galapagos tortoise species to go extinct. And it's very likely that in what remains of our lifetime, there will be thousands, if not tens of thousands, of reptiles that will go extinct. Now, I don't want to sound like totally negative or anything, but I think as nature journalers, we have a responsibility in a situation like this. I sure wish that someone had done some nature journal pages of Lonesome George's species. I don't think anyone did. And also the dodo, for example, it would have been great if someone did some nature journal pages of the dodo, because we don't even know what it sounded like. We don't really know what it looks like because the drawings are so bad, and we don't have any that many like poems or even written pieces about the dodo. Mostly they just make fun of how dumb it was, and some people talk about different recipes for cooking them. So if we could get more nature journalers out in the world, I think it could really make a difference. It could probably slow down the extinction rate, get people to care about nature more. And at the very least, there will be some nice nature journal pages representing some of these things that are going to be lost forever. Because no matter what we do, we are living in a period of great extinction that we're helping cause. So I think talking about it and thinking about it as a nature journal and what our responsibility is. Reptiles are many of them are endangered, especially the ones in the Galapagos. So as nature journalers, let's see what we can do. Sketching and nature journaling reptiles, I think, is potentially a powerful conservation strategy. So just wanted to share that with you all today. I hope you sketched along and got some practice in sketching reptiles. I had fun, and I know that if I do this once a week, my sketching of reptiles is going to get way better. I filled 1, 2, 3, 3.5 pages today. Is that it, or did I start? Okay, so I filled 3.5 pages of sketches, and that's how I'm going to grade myself. I'm not going to look back at some of these sketches and say, hey, that drawing of that one iguana head looks really wonky. I'm not going to judge myself based on that. I'm going to grade myself on how many pages I filled. And that's what I recommend you do also. If you keep doing this, if you keep that perspective, you're going to keep learning. You're going to get better drawings eventually. You're going to learn more about reptiles and what other animals, and maybe, just maybe, all of us working together can make a difference to help protect some of these species, these endangered species, help shift the way we as a species interact with the rest of the world. And at the very least, there will be some beautiful records and some beautiful nature journal pages representing these animals when they're gone. All right, I'll see you Wednesday night as usual and next Sunday. Bye. Bye.